This is the Compass Podcast, where we try to give you a glimpse of the divine in the everyday. My name is Ryan Dunn.
I'm Pierce Drake.
Today, we are talking with Rosario Picardo. He is a bivocational pastor, meaning that he works as a pastor, but he also works elsewhere too. Roz got his start in ministry while he was in the Marines and has since worked for a megachurch. He's been a church planter. Actually, I guess he still is a church planter. And most recently, he published a book, which is called Don't Look Down. That's kind of what drew him to our podcast today. Don't Look Down is a piece of inspiration for those of us who are feeling stuck in a rut or like we're sinking in life.
What I love about this podcast today, Ryan, is this. He takes a story that we've all heard. If we've ever poked our head in a church door before, we've probably heard the fact that there's this guy named Peter. We might not know who he is, but he walked with Jesus, and he's the one that got to walk on water. But he didn't always get it right. And so he takes this story, Roz does, and he breaks it down for us and how we can get out of our own ruts and get back to our everyday seeing Jesus in the midst of it.
So our conversation with Roz Picardo coming up. Well, Roz Picardo has joined us. He has just released a new book. It's called Don't Look Down. It kind of recounts the story of Peter stepping out of the boat and trying to walk on water as he sees Jesus walking on water, and how that brings some enlightenment to our own lives. Roz, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me guys on this podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we are so appreciative to have you spend the time with us. So where did this book come from? What was the inspiration to you trying to bring this story out in a new way?
Yeah, I would say the inspiration for me would be that I encounter so many different people throughout ministry and life who are just paralyzed by fear or the unknown and are afraid to take that step. And while I work with church planters and coaching relationships, I think of them as one of the most courageous groups of people that I've ever met starting a new work. And the other group of people, which really I've dedicated the proceeds of the book to, are my brothers and sisters who are in recovery from addictions. And so they're people that are stepping out, on the water, leaving their boat, and willing to take that new risk and adventure. And so I dedicated the proceeds of anything I make to a ministry that I call Joshua Recovery Ministries. So that group of folks are my heroes as well. And so really the inspiration came from those two groups, believe it or not, church planters and brothers and sisters in recovery.
What do you see as that's a church planters and people in recovery. I think I know church planters that have been in recovery and like that. Some people might hear that and go, well, that's the other end of the spectrum. And I hear that and go, that sounds like the same kind of people. And so for those people and what you've learned in this process, kind of what's the first step of taking a risk to get out of that rut?
Yeah. I tell people they need to push away on shore. So when you push away from shore, you're leaving the unknown. And a lot of times we're not willing to leave our comfortable setting, whatever that may be. Even though we're uncomfortable in our mess, we're still called to push away from the shore and even get in the boat to begin with. And so really, I think it starts there, the willingness to just get out and travel, be adventurous, get out from the familiar, the ordinary. And so once you're on the boat, that's when you decide, all right, I need to step out. But in order to step out of the boat, you need to really identify what that boat is. And so for some people, that boat is addiction. That boat is fear of the unknown. So if it's starting a new church or getting into the recovery process or starting that new job or leaving the job that they're currently in or starting that new business, whatever it may be, it's identifying the boat that they're in. And so that takes some journeying and some self-reflection and prayer. And so at the end of each chapter, I write some reflection questions that'll draw that out of individuals. What is their boat? What are they struggling with? what's holding them back, and really being able for them to wrestle with that. Because identifying your boat takes some time, and the boat could be toxic, and we could be using it as a crutch instead of leaning on God for God's plans for our lives, or we just rely on safety, comfort, and predictability.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you say to the person that goes, man, I got 2 kids, I'm running a 9 to 5. I'm going to soccer practice after that.
Yeah.
You know, man, I acknowledge that I really need to push off from shore, but at the same time, man, I've got responsibilities and I got stuff that's going on.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's going to look different for everybody. So it might not mean a radical shift, like you quit your job right now and leave, like Jesus calls, Peter, and he leaves the fishing business and all of a sudden starts following Jesus. It's going to look different for everybody. So it could be starting even a new hobby that you never started before, or getting involved in a group that you've never been a part of before. Or it could mean just letting go of some responsibilities that have become priorities that shouldn't be priorities. It could even be taking your family deeper as, hey, we're going to be a family on mission. There's a means to going to soccer games or whatnot. It's not just about playing or getting away, but it's about representing Christ and being a family on mission together. That would be a way to step out of the boat. So it's doing anything that's foreign to you.
Yeah.
That goes against your natural inclination. And that's going to look different for everybody.
So in your life then, do you purposefully do some things to kind of disrupt that monotony then, or to make sure that you're always kind of taking a step away from the boat?
I do. I try to challenge myself, even whether it's writing this book or, just different opportunities that I have to speak, train, or coach that get me out of my comfort zone. I never turn those opportunities down because it pushes me to go further than I wanted to. But to be honest with you, my problem hasn't always been to step out of the boat. That's always been easy for me, believe it or not. My problem is keeping my eyes on Jesus and doing it on my own strength. And so really the greatest fear I have for young pastors or just, people in general is when they experience success, lest they think it's themselves and not God. And when we when we start walking on the water, we could think it's us, and we forget to keep our eyes on Jesus. And so that's my biggest hindrance, if I'm honest with you all, is just being focused and taking that time and pausing and reflecting, because I'm always looking ahead to what's next instead of staying in the moment and keeping my eyes on Christ.
So are there guideposts that you have in your life that help you to kind of refocus on Christ when you need to?
Yeah, one of them is my wife.
Yeah.
So, she is there to speak truth, or also ask me to pray through the different opportunities that come my way, where I'm not just jumping out of the boat all the time. It's really doing some self-reflection and pausing, and that helps in the process. Having mentors along the way as well have really been a guide for me, where I'm able to share what's going on in my life, what I'm feeling, my schedule, making sure I'm not overdoing it, and just staying busy to stay busy.
Yeah. That's interesting. I want to put a little bit of a pause here and go back to something you said in passing. I just turned 30, and I'm a pastor, and et cetera. A lot of guys my age and females my age, mentorship comes up a lot. Yeah. And so my question to you is, and I mean, it may be a little bit of both, and probably is, in your being mentored, is that more of you seeking the person out, going, hey, like I see something in you that I'm missing or that I want to learn from? Or is it kind of just the natural rhythm of life, and you realize like, hey, like this person's here and I want to be intentional about this relationship?
I think it's both. So you see someone that's further ahead, but not so further ahead that you feel intimidated, and because that won't work. But someone that is going to share with you their mistakes and their flaws and also their victories.
Yeah.
And someone that you don't have to put up a front, or they're going to think less of you, or you worry about those types of things. So I think it's something you seek out intentionally, and I think you make it work in your rhythm of life, whether that mentor is present in your setting or you seek them out via Skype, or you take a drive once a month or once a quarter to go meet with them.
Yeah.
I think it's something you got to seek out, and it's really spiritual friendship. It's what the Celtics call amankara. So it's really seeking that person as a spiritual guide in a sense too, and that spiritual friendship that develops. So it's not always going to be heavy topics or how do I grow my ministry or anything like that, but it's more how is it with your soul? Tell me how you're really doing, and not getting caught up in just simply church growth or the latest way to keep your schedule. And because there's so many articles and podcasts that you can listen to on that, but there's not really much out there to really have people slow down. And so, you bring up an interesting point, because I'm seeing clergy your age that are ended up in the hospital, that are overdoing it because of this insurmountable pressure that they feel the church has put on them, or the denominations or whatnot, because we look at the young clergy and say they're going to rescue us, they're going to save us. And so I know some of them are having anxiety, panic attacks. They're ending up in the hospital because they're not taking care of themselves.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that over and over again.
Yeah, I see it too. And it's just interesting you said that.
So partners and mentors are a couple of guideposts. Were there others that you wanted to?
Yeah, mentors, and like I mentioned, my family is one of them, and so now, am I spending adequate time with my girls? Am I neglecting them in any way? And so part of it for me is having that dinner time with them as much as I can fit in. How many nights of the week am I out? Dinner time is one of the most important times you could have with your family, even if that means my girl is sitting in her high chair and the other one's sitting in her, what we call her bumbo seat. That's vital, even if it means we're only eating together 30 minutes or whatever. And so those are kind of guideposts as well, where am I taking the time for my priorities, what I preach and teach on? Am I living that out? Am I actually doing that? And that's been helpful for me too. And then it's really looking through my week and making sure, hey, are all these priorities that I'm doing, are these asking myself, are these life-giving? Now, there are things you do in your schedule in your life that you got to do because it's your responsibility. Yeah. But am I taking on more than I should? And am I doing the things that I've committed to? Am I doing them well? And so really wrestling with that. And that might mean stepping back from something. It might mean saying no. And you learn that from experience. For me, it's, do I really need to have all these meetings scheduled? Would an email suffice? Or do I need to meet with this individual? Or, it's having boundaries. Those are guideposts, having those boundaries. Unfortunately, when we talk about boundaries now, we almost use that as an excuse not to do anything. And you guys probably have heard that too, because you could have so many boundaries and you don't do any kind of ministry or any kind of interactions with people.
That's right. So don't look down encourages a bit of an adventure seeking as a means of that. How do you seek adventure in the everyday? And then maybe even just like, I love the everyday question, but I love quarterly. I don't know how to even phrase that, but like the bigger adventure. Yeah. So the bigger adventure, however that's done, and then the everyday.
Yeah. The everyday for me, it starts with a prayer. God, guide me to what you want me to do, where you want me to be. Interrupt my day. I call those divine interruptions. So we could have something scheduled, and that schedule can flip at a moment's notice, and it's being open to that. That's how you're open to adventure too.
Yeah.
is by giving your day over to God. So when I was planting my first church, it was a parachute drop, meaning I had no people, no building, no real money, but a vision to reach broken and hurting people. And I remember starting my day and saying, God, lead me where you want me to go. I'd get in the car and I'd drive somewhere and end up at a, different place, restaurant or coffee shop, and having positive interactions with people. And so that's one way to really be open to adventure every day is praying that prayer. It's giving it over to God. It's being open and pliable, that you are the clay in a sense and God is the potter. So that's how I've tried to kind of live that. And then I mentioned having people around you that are going to challenge you. And so always look ahead to where people are, where you want to be. And so in rubbing shoulders with them, whether if it's a business owner and you're an, aspiring business startup entrepreneur type person, getting with that person, who's ahead of you doing what you want to do, and ask how they got there and what steps they took. So that plays a crucial role, definitely seeking God in that, but then seeking the help of the community of faith and recognizing that a calling is going to be inward and outward. Inward meaning God's going to challenge you in your core. Romans 8:16, God's Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we're children of God. But then there's that outward calling. It's what we call confirmation, right? And so it's what others say about you, what others are pushing you to do, that know you well, that have a relationship with God. And so if I have an inner calling to be a singer, but I can't even sing in the shower, the inward and outward calling aren't matching up.
Yeah.
And so it's looking at that too. So seeing the community of faith playing a role in that every day by having those friendships and relationships. And so when I highlight the book, I do that by looking at different stories, real life stories of men and women who had to step out of their boat. Some of them quit their jobs. Others of them, there's one, my friend Tim, who I highlight, he had 3 heart attacks before the age of 50.
Wow.
And so he had to medically retire from what he was doing in HVAC and was making good money, everything else, but he had to step back, and he thought his life was over and didn't know what God had for him. He couldn't lift much weight anymore because of the heart attacks, and yet God impressed upon him to start doing visits. And so he started visiting people in hospitals and different things, and then before you know it, he started to interact with the homeless community. And then before you know it, he started his own nonprofit called Rides to Work that gives people on the margins of society rides to their employment. And they get rides for like 6 months, and then before you know it, they have to pay $1. And he ends up talking to them, building relationships with them, and now is baptizing them. He's given over 5,000 rides a year, and he has a crew of people and a team. But that didn't start right away. He had to step out of his boat, acknowledge, things aren't going to be the same from when he was working. What does God have for him? And he recognized God wasn't done with him, but God was just beginning his ministry. So looking at those real life examples, and there's another thing that really I encounter too with people is they don't think they're in ministry unless they're working at a church.
Yeah. And
really that's a falsehood, because if we truly believe in something called the priesthood of all believers, it's not that we receive a paycheck from the church, but what we were made for is not necessarily what we're paid for, and what we're paid for is not necessarily what we're made for. And so looking at those God opportunities in the everyday realm.
So, Roz, you talk about hearing the inward calling of God. What are some of the practices, or what are some of the ways that you hear that?
For me, it's simply if something keeps coming up inside of me. And so in my prayer time, a desire or thought, God speaks through our personality, right? And how God has wired us. So when we come to faith, God doesn't tell us to put our brains on the shelf or our personalities on the shelf. So we're to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Some people are heart people, right? They love God through conversation and talking. That's how they connect with God. Others are soul people, and the soul really has to do with feelings and emotions. The mind is people who find time with God and worship with God through their intellect. It's reading and studying. And then you have your strength people, loving the Lord your God with your strength. Those are your doers, right? They worship by doing. And so for me, it's a combination where, we have that predominant one we fall into, but it's like, for me, it's the doing. God, what are you calling me to do? And if I have this desire to do something, whether it's write a book or start a project, and it keeps coming to mind, that's how I know it's from the Lord. And then once I speak it or I vocalize it to a mentor or somebody like that, and they confirm it, that's when I try to step out of the boat. But there are times where something comes and it's a fleeting idea or thought, and it doesn't come back around, or I don't have the passion around it. But if it's reoccurring and it's confirmed, hey, have you ever thought about doing X, Y, or Z? Then I'm like, okay, maybe I need to think about that, God. So not every idea is a God idea. It could be a good idea, but it doesn't make it a God idea that God's calling you to do a certain action or thing. But often God will speak to you through your personality, your wiring, and makeup.
I love that. So often we kind of think that our personalities are something that we have to put aside for God, or that we're in conflict with God naturally, right? So this idea that God is speaking through who we naturally are is wonderful. Right.
And so, in modern day Christianity, we're made to look foolish on, in the media that, well, Christians vote the same, they act the same, they look the same, they watch the same films and listen to the same music. And, and we know that's not the case. And so how do we live into our God identity? And how does God speak to us uniquely?
Going back to the very beginning, talking about pastors and addicts and people struggling with anxiety and all those things, how do those play into that inner voice and understanding, hold up now, is this the struggle I'm going through, or is this God?
With my work in recovery, and a lot of the guys I mentor, they do, I know guys that have completely experienced a life turnaround. So one of the guys I baptized 2 Easters ago, first time in his life he's sober. It's 2 years now. This guy is so talented. He picks up things quickly and learns quickly. He's mentoring people. But, he has 89 misdemeanors and over 20 felonies, right? Yeah. And now is the first time ever that he's held a job, and he's doing awesome. But when guys experience a major turnaround, they end up becoming legalistic in a sense, because it's the pendulum swings. And so they're in the Word and they're reading, but they aren't checking with the community of faith in terms of, hey, how does this scripture really speak, and how has it been interpreted, and how does this apply in everyday life? I work with them on those kind of basics as a spiritual mentor, where they have to constantly check themselves, making sure, I'm continuing to grow in my faith journey, but it's not going to be by legalistic means, and God's not going to just wipe away my personality, and I don't have to become somebody I'm not, because they're getting to really know themselves for the first time ever. And so working with them, they've taken the step out of the boat, but they're finding their true identity and who they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the idea of that inner voice, and that's where it starts so much in that God vision, and how we're
So they think that, is God speaking to me, or is this off base? Because they just read something in the Bible and they do it, which is great. Or they have a feeling from God, but it's not backed by Scripture at all. Yeah. So it's those checks and balances I work with them on to make sure they're not making any drastic decisions oh, Jesus said to go sell all your possessions and give to the poor.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to take it literally. And God bless them if they do.
So I think that's where the mentor plays such a heavy
Exactly.
role into that, to be able to bounce that idea off of and go, hey, like,
Yep.
I think in the Christian culture so often, at least the one I grew up in, so often we have this, like, we feel like that we've heard something from God, we felt something from God, but we can't touch it until somebody else calls it out of us.
Right.
Like I can't, I feel that, but I gotta have somebody, but we won't bring it to anybody. Like we're just waiting back in a very passive stance, and so I think that's getting back to the mentorship. Like that's why it's so important to have that conversation. I love what you said there, and I haven't heard this before actually, and I think it's profound. The idea that finding you want to get a mentor that's doing it better than you, down the road from you, but not so far that that you're intimidated by them. And I think I think so often when we think of mentors, we think, well, man, if I want to do business, man, how do I get 30 minutes with Mark Cuban?
Right.
And so doing it with somebody that's ahead of you, but not too far ahead of you. And I think, man, now the options are wide open.
Right. And this book really, I mean, for folks, a lot of folks just what I call sit on their assets.
Mm-hmm.
And and the church is full of them, right? We hear the 80-20 rule. 80% of the 80% of the people don't do anything. It's the 20% that do 80% of the work.
Yeah.
Well,
the church
we
is
lift
full
up
of
the
assets too. I just need to.
Yeah. Right. And we lift up the 20% like they're the heroes, but they're the dysfunctional ones too.
Oh yeah.
That are taking on all the work. So the book, it's for those that are stuck and need to get out of the boat. That's what this book is for. But it's also for those that are enthusiastic, like the Peters, that are willing to jump out. Hey, you got to keep your eyes on Jesus too, and not do it in your own strength and in your own power, lest you think it's you and not God.
So in the story, Peter does jump out of the boat and he starts walking on water and then he sinks. And I think that is kind of a great part to include in the story, that, he has this moment of bravery that is still coupled with a sense of doubt. And so in the book, after each chapter, you offer some questions for helping to apply some application. I want to turn one of these questions back on you, Pastor Roz. How do you focus to the exclusion of worries, fears, and desires to control the circumstances?
Yeah, that's good. There are certain things that are outside of your control, and I'm a doer, and so my tendency is to fix and manipulate, and to just, hey, it's just going to take more hard work. There are some things that even in your hardest work you can't do on your own, and so I had to learn the practice of surrendering things over to God, and it gets me on my knees to pray, or keeps my eyes on Jesus, because on my own I can't fix it. I can't do it. Certain situations that I face, or certain things that people are going through that break my heart, I can't do it for them. I have to surrender them over to God, because God cares and loves them more than I ever could, or God cares and loves me and the details of my life more than I do. And so it's recognizing, God, I surrender this over to you. And I think really I can't control the circumstances. None of us can control circumstances. Sometimes we can, but not all the time. But I can control my response. That's what I try to focus on, is how do I fix my response where I'm focusing on Jesus? Because even if the circumstance isn't pleasant, I can control my response, which ultimately I believe is going to have something to do with the outcome. So with Peter, the circumstance was he was sinking. His response, of course, was to cry out to God, because he had no other choice. He couldn't save himself. He had to go to Jesus. He had to cry out to Jesus, and the outcome was, of course, he gets, he's saved and all that. But when you're sinking, there's not much you can do to save yourself.
What I love about the Peter story that, and this is me reading into the text, so it's not in, it missed verses. It didn't get put in, but Peter walks to Jesus, he sinks, and then the next verse is like they're back in the boat.
Yeah,
and it's like, wait, hold up, how'd they get back in the boat?
Right.
And again, this is me reading into it, but I just imagine Jesus going, I'm not going to let you end in failure. We're going to walk back together to the boat.
Right.
And so we don't leave the moment. We don't leave the season. We don't leave whatever it is in the failure when we cry out to Jesus.
Yeah.
He could have thrown him back in there. I mean, he's strong enough probably. I mean, he could have probably just picked him up and thrown him back. But in my world, they walk back together.
Yeah, they go, and God, we see this in Jesus. He loves us enough to meet us where we're at, and loves us more than enough not to leave us in that state.
That's right.
Well, what's the next adventure for you?
The next adventure, man, that's a great question. I'm loving my life right now, and loving what I get to do with ministry, with Mosaic Church, my work in Dayton with immigrants, refugees, and the recovery community. We're seeing great things happen. My work at United Theological Seminary. I'm really just trying to stay focused on my current things, on what I'm doing right now, and then seeing what God opens up. I really felt like 2019 is the year for me not to push it as hard as I've normally pushed in the past and let things kind of come, which it goes against every grain and fiber in my being, but that's how I've the posture I've taken. One of the things is we're about to finish a book project called From Franchise to Local Dive. It's finding your local flavor. So it talks about churches finding the local flavor in their communities, and it's not cookie cutter Christianity or the big box mentality where franchises have predictable, sterile, stale foods, but it's cooking with freshness, and how churches can do that, and how even larger churches are more moving toward disaffiliation with their multi-site systems and allowing those churches to be autonomous. So we're seeing a course correction now with several churches that are doing that throughout the country.
So Ross, where can people find you out there on the internet, on the interwebs?
Yeah, you can look me up at rosariopicardo.com or picardocoaching.com, and you can find me at Rev Roz on Twitter or Facebook. My Facebook is Rev Roz as well, rev.roz.
You can find the book Don't Look Down through Amazon or at Abingdon Press, and find Pastor Roz at rosariopicardo.com or at Rev Roz on Twitter and Facebook. We'll have links for that in the show notes. Pierce, where can they hook up with you?
Oh, Instagram and Twitter, JPDII is where I live.
And I'm checking things out through rethinkchurch.org, which is where you can find where this podcast lives as well, or wherever you find podcasts. This podcast is available. So if you would do us a favor, hop on over to iTunes, leave a rating. It helps other people find us. We want to thank Dan McConnell, who did some of the technical stuff in putting this episode together. Also Lane Denson, who makes sure that this podcast gets into your hands. Hope you're having a great one, and look forward to talking to you next time.